Good evening and welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of Shoot the Gap, the IDP Fantasy Football podcast here at Fantasy and Frames and fantasyandframes.com. I'm your host, Jorge Edwards, and with me, as I have every week, got Justin Taylor, aka JT Orange, over on the Twitter machine. We are here to talk about the AFC West IDP situation here for fantasy football. We're going to be covering all the major positions here for fantasy per team that you should be caring about and maybe fading this coming season. So just stay tuned and let's hit this music. Man, JT, we had a really good show last week. I really want to give a shout out to at IDP Hunter. That was a great show last week talking about the AFC East. IDP. What really blew up was the views. JT, I think you and I both were like, are we at 2,000 views for this episode? And it's like, yeah. I think we are. So you all must really like your AFC East IDP, which is something we'll take into consideration when putting out article content or putting those players in the forefront of discussions going forward. In any event, thank you very much for making last week's show our most watched here on Shoot the Gap. Aside from that, JT, man, what you been up to since last we spoke here on Shoot the Gap?
Yeah, things getting a little crazy for me, getting closer to the school year. My son Walker's 10 years old, just starting his first year in tackle football, 5th grade. So I'm one of the coaches, assistant head coach and defensive coordinator. Started practice on Monday. Most of these kids had never worn pads. They're coming on like, oh, my helmet feels funny because they just never had put helmets on, pads on, anything. So pretty crazy. First practice in the books. Kids were trying to figure it out. Second practice, we're like, all right, we're going to do just a little hitting, like 50%, just kind of get the feel. And tonight we kind of cranked it up a little bit of a notch, and we saw what kids are real fired up to hit and which ones aren't. Still got to get a little used to it, but it was a fun night. I coached high school football for about 7 years at the JV and varsity level. So this is my first time coaching tackle. I've coached flag a couple years. This is my first time coaching tackle with this young of an age group. So really interesting, teaching them like ins and outs, wide receivers, DBs, how do you do a drop? How do you line up? Walking through these offenses with all these kids, flag football, you're just running around the field, you're screaming the quarterback's name, hoping he chucks you the football is how it works most of the time. I mean, as a coach, you try to not have it do that, but that's what ends up happening most of the time. So really trying to teach these kids like the ins and outs of real football. Hey, what's the A gap? What's the B gap? What's the C gap? What's the D gap? Where is my responsibility? If I'm blitzing, where am I, what gap am I shooting? So really fun with that. We had our first night of defense tonight. We were running a 4-4-3. Pretty pumped about it. I love the 4-4 stack defense. You can do so many things out of it, just with hiding blitzes and different things. So pretty pumped about it. So my son got some real nice licks in. He was pretty fired up tonight. So he was good. So I was proud of him. So good job, Walker. So it's fun. We get a good group of kids. So hopefully it's a great season.
I like how you threw in there the Shoot the Gap there because we're on Shoot the Gap right now.
You got a defense. You got to shoot the gap. So
that's right.
That's the way it works.
This is like probably the most brilliantly named podcast I've ever come up with, and now it's all downhill from here. We got Steve Hungarter in the chat, aka at IDP Hunter. Jorge and JT are the heroes that Gotham definitely deserves. Thank you. You know what I like about you, Steve? You get the Batman references. I appreciate you. So thank you very much for tuning in, and everybody who's tuning in now on Twitter and on YouTube. And if you're on YouTube or you're on Twitter, follow us at Fantasy and Frames, specifically for the YouTube folks. If you could hit that subscribe button and notification bell, we will notify you when we put out a plethora of fantasy football content that we have here at Fantasy Frames. We got redraft season kicking up. We still got Dynasty, which is 24/7, 365. We got obviously us here, the IDP show. Shoot the Gap we have coming up this season. It's going to be crazy. I dropped this in our group chat earlier today. We have our pregame shows every Sunday from 8 a.m. to noon, sometimes 12:30 p.m., covering every single fantasy relevant player from every single game. And then, Tuesdays then Mondays we have our college fantasy show, which thank you all for tuning in and listening to the Chris Battistel and Mike Haas talk about their quarterback rankings for college football. That was a awesome episode.
Jorge, I jumped in and listened to that, and right up my alley. A lot of Shador Sanders talk where people are really love him or hate him, and I was like, oh, he was hard time. I really like him. I like Sanders, so I was like, I had to back him up a little bit. I was like, I'm on that other side. I've gotten a lot of hate over the last year and a half of my rankings of where I have Shador Sanders. So I appreciated that episode. It was a good one to watch.
Well, let's be honest here. Like, we would be negligent to tell you that, college football 25, the NCAA game that came out last week, is makes a lot of people very impressionable to the college game, and we already know how much fun fantasy football is, and so we hope that you all are transitioning from like playing a video game to playing college fantasy. And speaking of which, on that show on the One Foot Down podcast, starting next week and every other week till the start of the college fantasy football season, we'll be giving away copies of NCAA College 25. So,
which is freaking awesome.
Yeah,
I pre-bought it. My son was like, "Dad, we're getting this game right." I'm like, "Yes." I don't play video games much anymore, but I tell you what, I own every copy of any college football game ever produced. I bought Bill Walsh College Football, the very first one.
Wow.
I all the way through. I used to play with Drew Bledsoe in Washington State on college football. Bill Walsh back in the day. I've had everyone all the way through. I have spent an ungodly amount of time on college football in my day. That's all I did growing up, high school, college. If I wasn't playing sports and I wasn't at school, I was playing college football or Madden, mostly college football, because that was my favorite thing growing up. So me and my son have the game. We played it twice. He's played a bunch. I've been busy, so I haven't got him in games in. I'm hoping to steal some time later tonight, and play some games myself. He challenged me right off the bat. We haven't played together in a while because he was a little young. I used to beat up on him a little bit, and he'd get upset. So I didn't want him fighting me. So now he's a little older. He feels a little more confident. Challenged me to a game. Jorge, I smoked him. I absolutely smoked him. 84-21 in the first game, 73-28 in the second game. And you know why I won? Defense, baby. Defense. I kept getting interceptions, takeaways. He's like, why do you keep picking everything else? I was like, I know how to call defensive plays. I know what you're doing. I'm dropping right into that zone, baby. He kept trying to throw all over me. I was running the ball on him. He's like, I just don't understand. I was like, you're throwing every play. I know exactly what's coming. I had it lined up. He couldn't believe it. He was so mad. I was like, man, you're going to have to start learning these offenses and defenses. Yeah. And I literally hadn't played it. Oh, man, I bet you I hadn't picked up a controller in probably 2 years, and before that I hadn't played in a really long time, other than me and him playing Madden when he was probably 6 or 7. But again, he got mad at me, so we stopped playing because he didn't want that to happen. So, but he challenged me, and I was like, dude, time to work on your game. So that's the realness of that college football, though. You need to know offensive and defenses. If you just think you can go out and just throw the ball around, unless you're playing on the easiest level, you cannot. So if you're playing on the easiest, you can do it, but you got to know defenses. And I tell everybody, all the years I played that game, I played in tournaments when I was in college. It didn't matter what team I played with. People would laugh at me because I played with like Syracuse with like Donovan McNabb, and they're like, you're running the triple option with Syracuse, and everybody else is taking like the top 10 ranked teams, and I'm smoking people. They know how to play defense, and they didn't know how to play defense. I was like, made a big difference. So I had to throw that in here on the shoot the gap, but I need to get some games in. I got some people trying to talk me into a league. I don't know if I have enough time, but I need to get some practice in before I jump into a league.
Yeah, no, so seriously, that is awesome. Gotta make the kids win the hard way and the right way.
Can't just give it to them.
No,
Because the
you
problem
can't.
is you give it to them, they start talking smack. They're like,
Yeah,
my
no,
son's like, oh, he's like, you're trash at this game. I own you. I'm like, all right, I'm going to smoke you
really.
now. I'm like,
Yeah,
he threw a
exactly.
touchdown on me like the third play of the game. He thought he had me in the books. 2 straight pick sixes after that. I drove down the
Boom.
field, scored, and then back-to-back pick sixes. I just read it, cover 2 zone, guy on the outside. He tried to hit him, safety, boom, jumps right in front, runs it back for a touchdown.
See, that's what I'm talking about. Um, uh, what do you? So anyhow, so yeah, Mondays are college fantasy nights here at Fantasy and Frames. Then we got our waiver show on Tuesday. Yeah, Fantasy and Frames Wednesdays. Then we have our DFS show with the Daily Fix with Keith Fleming and Joe Matz. I mean, we got a lot of stuff coming your way. Dynasty Pros Football. JT is way too excited. I'm with you, dude.
I'm all fired up.
It's
all fired up.
But you know what? You talked about it, and you said it. You said what it came down to was defense, and that's what we're here to talk about here on Shoot the Gap. And so let's just get into some defense. Let's pick a team to talk about, and let's get into it here, JT. Let's talk about the Denver Broncos. Notable, missing part of that defense is no Justin Simmons. He's still a free agent there. Could have kind of went into a younger direction there. But before we get to defensive backs, let's get into the position everybody likes talking about for IDP, which is the linebacking position. Josie Jewell no longer there. Cody Barton, former Seahawk, former Commander, now a Denver Bronco, next to Alex Singleton. Drew Sanders, I believe, had another injury this year, and he's out for the 24th season. And Alex Singleton, he's an interesting fellow. Because if you look back the past 2 seasons, it's a tale of interesting tapes. You look back in 2022, he had a 20.4% tackle rate. And like we do here at Fantasy and Frames, we like talking about Fantasy Pros IDP scoring because that's what we take part in the ECR competition. He finished as the linebacker 21. So a solid LB2, I think. With a 20.4% tackle rate. 2023, he had a 16.3% tackle rate, finished as an LB9. If you go back to 2021, he was the LB22. So last year, he really took it up a level in production for fantasy purposes, as well as just in football, in general. And that was Josie Jewell there. And we kind of saw Josie Jewell kind of like fade a little bit. I was expecting that tandem to be a little bit more of a 1-2 punch, and it became more of a Alex Singleton show with some Josie Jewell sprinkled in there for tackling production. Now he's gone. He's in Carolina. I believe that's where he's at. And you bring in Cody Barton, and say what you will from a real football perspective, like why the Seahawks let him go, why the Commanders let him go. The guy puts up tackle numbers. However many, however inefficient they can be, he puts up those tackle numbers, and I have to start thinking to myself now, okay, well, does this hurt or help Alex Singleton from being a definitive LB1 for most people in their fantasy leagues this year?
Yeah, these guys I think are really interesting because this is where real life and fantasy kind of like you have the intersection where you're like, oh, how much is it real life? Both of these guys are productive, statistical guys, but are they really that good of NFL players? That's the biggest issue, I think, with these 2 guys. So, fantasy wise, both of them have put up really nice stats over the years. What does that mean for the Denver Broncos defense overall? I don't know if that makes them all that good or if these guys are just making, we always talk about are these guys making the tackle 1 yard downfield, or are they making the tackle 6 yards downfield? In fantasy, it still doesn't matter. You get the tackle no matter what. So these guys have put up points. I still think Singleton. I think this Denver team is not going to be good. I really don't think they're going to be good. So I think Singleton's going to have a million opportunities to make rush tackles. Teams are going to run the ball against them. Barton, I have to be honest, was one of my absolute favorite plays the last couple of years. If you were just like looking for someone cheap, he was a guy you could just steal in drafts. You could steal off the waiver wire and get solid production from. So he was one of my favorite players at the cost the last 2 seasons. And there at the end of Seattle and then in Washington, I had him on all kinds of teams because he was just a guy that kind of people, weren't in love with. They kind of forgot about him. It's almost like he became a starter only because of injury. And then it's like, oh, well, he did pretty good when he was in there. So he's been a guy I've liked. It's going to be interesting how he fits in here with Jewel. I do think both these guys are going to be pretty good options on your team for production. And I don't think either one are going to be that expensive because they're just not sexy names. Singleton, people kind of know about him, but it's still not like people don't overdraft him like they do some of these other linebackers. So I definitely think, these guys are worth a target in your league, depending on where you feel like you want to take them. If you want to take some other positions earlier and you want to wait on linebacker, these are guys I think you might be able to snag a little later.
So my concern with that is recency bias is a mother. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so people are going to remember Singleton's, top 10 finish from last year and kind of look past the LB 21 and 22 finishes the previous couple of years. But with that being the case, if Singleton is somebody that people are targeting, in the middle of their drafts or towards the 10th round of their fantasy drafts, I'm still going to drink the Kool-Aid on Cody Barton. I still think he can give you valuable numbers, valuable tackle numbers. He can give you LB3 with LB2 upside and potentially give you some LB1 weeks. But more often than not, that 2-3 range is where I'm hoping for. Whereas Singleton, I don't know whether last year was a money or a mirage, hint a segment we'll be doing in the fall, based off of just his fantasy performance. We have Steve in the chat who pointed out, like, look, he played 190 snaps last year, 177 total tackles. Like I said, the 16.3% tackle rate, really good. I just with just a volume tackler like Cody Barton's been, I kind of want to move him down a little bit in my ranks heading into the season. Charlene in here in the chat. What's up, Charlene? Just in time to hear about my Broncos. I mean, we can't possibly be worse, right? That is the silver lining. You are absolutely right. And you know what? I know this is not IDP talk, but I think I'm going to be a believer in Bo Nix, just for the time being here.
I have not been a Bo Nix guy this offseason, but I could see it happening. I think if they rebuild it right, I feel like this is the spot. I think they give them time. They know, hey, we're maybe not going to be that great this year or next year, but let's build right. I think that they can do it. I like where your head's at on Cody Barton. I mean, missed 4 games last year and still was a top 40 guy. So if you looked at his points per game average, I mean, you're like you said, he was a really solid LB3 with that LB2 upside. So I like where your head's at there. And to me, he feels like a guy that just gets forgotten. I think people just forget about him sometimes.
Speaking of forgetting about things, this guy right here forgot about something that's really important that we want to talk about, and that is every single podcast here on Fantasy and Frames, we're all doing listener leagues, redraft listener leagues for everybody to participate in. And this year, Shoot the Gap is doing their listener league. It's all defense, folks. It is 3 defensive linemen, 3 linebackers, 3 defensive backs, 3 IDP flex spots, 7 bench spots. That way you're left with having still some viable options there on your waiver wire. Whereas, other leagues, they have deeper benches and you're basically left picking at scraps, which, no disrespect to the people that are on the waiver wire, but, you want to have some kind of people that have some kind of upside for you to go put waiver bids in. And the one that I like the most is the team defense. Now, normally, in non-IDP leagues, you have your defense, special teams, and we cut out all the special teams junk. No scoring for special teams. This is strictly just based off of defensive performances. And a team defense in this league actually matters. So you actually have to adjust your thinking, your thought process as far as priority of who you're drafting and when you're drafting. We didn't want to make it, something that was, a common type of draft. We wanted to make it interesting, different, fun, that you all can have fun participating in. If you head over to our Twitter page, we dropped the link for it earlier today. I'll put it in the chat in a few minutes here on YouTube. Join. We'd be happy for you to join. Bob Miller, I'll get to your question in a second. JT, I'll be participating. I know we have about 4 or 5 people on top of that who've signed up already. So it's a 12-team league redraft. I think, people who, if you're watching this show, I think especially for the new people to IDP, this is for me what I would recommend jumping into. Like I understand people have the thought process of like, well, you should not tell people how to play fantasy football. You should let people build their leagues the way they want to build their leagues. My personal take on IDP and integrating IDP into your fantasy football league is, if you're going to do it right. And what do I mean by that is, traditionally speaking, and sorry for stereotyping here, but people who are like introduced to IDP, they're probably not going to give high point values per play for the IDP player, because they don't want their IDPs to outshine their offensive players, right? And then they'll be like, okay, well, we're going to give you the bare minimum of point totals that you can get per position for play, and then we're only going to throw in one IDP player. At that point, you're not rewarding the IDP's performance, and you're only putting one player on your roster. You might as well just not have the IDP there, because where's the value? Whereas here, if you put in more IDPs at different positions, now you're starting to assess value across the different positions, and you're making them worth a damn. You know what I mean? So this league in itself is a great way to kind of like jump in to kind of like learn the ins and outs of what IDP is. So that way, when you bring it up with your league mates the following year, next year, or before the season kicks off this year, you kind of have an idea of like, okay, I can assess value now of what these players are worth based off of scoring settings, and you'll be able to give IDP a shot. And let's say it's not your thing, it's not your thing. Like, nobody's telling you, you have to, like, no, you don't have to do anything. If it's not your thing, it's not your thing. I can guarantee you, though, if you play in this league, you're going to walk away having fun, because the scoring settings are very atypical. And I guarantee you'll be making some friends out of it too, because if there's one thing I'll say about the IDP fantasy football community is we stick together. We like supporting each other because we understand. You know what I mean, JT? I think you could speak to that also. Like, it's a small niche in the world of fantasy football, but because of that, we support each other. We support our passion for it. And, is there anything else you want to say about the listener league?
That's just what I said. I put it on my Twitter page and reposted. I just said, if you have ever thought about getting an IDP league, this is the way to do it. Get in here, try it out, see how fun it is. And you're not having to worry about like, offense and defense. I think this is almost the most pure way to get in. Just play defense, see how fun it is with all these defensive guys, and then you can see like, okay, now I can add this to offense and it be really a really fun thing. So if you're ever worried about, I don't want to get into a big league and I don't know what's going on, this is a great chance to just see what it's like, see what IDP is about. If you get in, you don't like it, okay, I would be shocked, to be honest with you, because almost anyone I've ever got into an IDP league, they're like, oh man, the first time you win a game on a pick six or a sack
Yes.
fumble, you are hooked. You're like, I thought it was over. My team wasn't going to get the ball back on offense, and you win it on defense. That is when you are stuck on IDP. It just sucks you in. And this is a great way to do it. This is a great way to try it out.
And I'll remind you, folks, if you go back to the Super Bowl a couple years ago, where it was the Rams versus the Bengals, everybody remembers Cooper Kupp's touchdown, okay, to take the lead. But it was Aaron Donald's sack that won the game for the Los Angeles Rams. So pay
I'll
attention
never
to
forget the Nick Bolton almost 2 touchdowns in the Super
that.
Bowl. The one got
Yes.
called back. I had him as MVP at like insane odds. I couldn't believe he didn't get the other one didn't get called, that he didn't get it. I was like, it was, I mean, huge odds for him to win defensive MVP or to win MVP of the game as a defender. Man, uh, it's so much fun, and we'll talk about my guy coming up here, Nick Bolton. But once you start finding out who these guys are and you start paying attention to them, man, it's just so addicting.
So I just dropped the link for the Sleeper League both in our Facebook chat as well as our YouTube chat. So click in there, join up. Guaranteed you're gonna have a lot of fun. Okay, Bob Miller. I promised I would get to your question because it is an important question. Me being a Marvel geek here, and tomorrow being a very important day. Jorge, here's the most important question: Deadpool and Wolverine. What time are you going? LOL. I'm going. So I live outside of Washington D.C. So I'll be going into Washington D.C. to downtown Chinatown to their Regal Cinemas at 6:30 p.m. with some people from work, and just gonna enjoy it. So thank you very much for asking.
I got a little shout out for Bob here at Dynasty Pros. I wore my IDP shirt to football practice tonight for the first defensive practice. So Bob
Nice.
Miller made that shirt, sent it to me. Awesome shirt. My girlfriend was like, I can't believe you're wearing that shirt to practice. I wore my IDP shirt to the first practice for our fifth graders. I was like, defense matters, baby. Defense matters. So shout out to Bob and that awesome IDP shirt. I love it.
You gotta love the work over there at Dynasty Pros. And Bob Miller's just a class act guy and Ravens fan, and just great guy. If you're not following him, definitely follow him over on Twitter. And Bob, if you want to drop your Twitter handle in the chat, do so the good people here can give you a follow and enjoy everything that you bring to the table here, buddy. But let's get back to the table. Let's talk about the edge rusher position here, those outside linebackers for the Denver Broncos. Look, I'm slowly becoming a Jonathan Cooper fan. We look at, I believe he had a 13% pressure rate last year. 9 sacks per PFF, 55 pressures, led the team in pressures. So, is he the sexiest of edge rushers in fantasy football? No. But, who cares as long as the production is there? And if we're looking at production, last year's, according to Fantasy Pros' IDP scoring, he finished as the defensive lineman 12, averaging 9.7 points per game. So, he didn't have sacks on the season. He a forced fumble, a couple fumble recoveries, even had a defensive touchdown, had 43 solo tackles to 27. So you like that solo to assist ratio there because solo tackles traditionally count for more than assisted tackles. So there's a lot of good things going around there. And I think if you're going linebacker heavy in your IDP drafts, Jonathan Cooper is a name that you may want to just, keep tabs on. Like, for example, you and I, JT, are in the FF7 leagues, which are run by IDP Iggy over at Sports Affiliation on Twitter. And we have offensive, defensive players. And I waited for Jonathan Cooper to fall to me. And when he did, I was like, yes, draft. Let me go get this guy, have him on my team. Any thoughts on Jonathan Cooper here for the Denver Broncos? Or is there another edge rusher for the Broncos that you may be interested in?
Yeah, I think Cooper's the guy here if I'm going with a Denver guy. Again, I think, the people that are high up on him and are paying attention are all over him. But again, a lot of these Denver guys just aren't the sexy names. So if you're in leagues where, people are new to IDP or, they're not paying as much attention, some of these guys are going way lower than they probably should for their production. And I think Cooper's one of those guys. So he's a guy I would love to target. The other two guys on the outside, I just don't know how I feel about them. Nick Bonito and Baron Browning, they've kind of switched off. Both of them have looked good at times, and both of them kind of faded at times. those are two guys I'm probably waiting on. I'm waiting to see if somebody takes over. I think they're going to share some time. I think they're going to rotate a little bit on the outside. So those are two guys I want to keep an eye on. Maybe, if you got the watch list in your league, those guys I'm probably putting a watch list on, but I'm probably not drafting unless I'm, real desperate for somebody. Um, I just am not sure which one of those guys is going to eventually be the guy there, or if they separate, one of them separates themselves enough from the other one. But I do like Cooper, and I do think if people are looking at name value and not looking at production, he's a guy that could slip. Because just a lot of people, he was a 7th round pick. He's a guy 4 years in. Kind of really hit last year. So he's a guy that maybe people aren't super high up on because they just didn't really know about him. But he finished way higher than a lot of big names in the league. Some of the guys that finished behind him that were definitely going over him in drafts, Jonathan Grenard, Carl Granderson, Kevin Thibodeau, Alex Highsmith, there's some guys that people probably aren't looking at his name quite in the same boat as some of those other guys, and he's a
Right.
better value and he's more productive.
In terms of those participating in defensive tackle specific leagues here, Zach Allen, he led all of the defensive linemen, both edge rushers and defensive tackles, with 60 pressures on the season with 7 sacks. Is he somebody that people should be paying attention to in their defensive tackle leagues?
Yeah, if I'm in a my fantasy league where you got to start a D tackle, this is one of the teams I really like. So sometimes we talk about teams and we're like, you know, I, there's not really anybody rosterable on the inside. They're gap fillers. They're not really making plays. This team actually has some pretty good guys up front. Zach Allen coming over from Arizona. He's really, really good last year. And then now John Franklin Myers coming over from the Jets. So he's a really interesting guy that qualifies as a defensive tackle in that kind of 3-4 system that they run. So both of those guys are guys definitely in defensive tackle starter leagues that I'm definitely considering taking on in my league, and guys I would want to roster because I think they're going to be, definitely playable and can get you some really nice stats.
Very nice. Let's go to the defensive back position here. And let's start at safety. Again, no more Justin Simmons in Denver. That sucks. And I hope it was an issue of
Can't wait to
just
see where he goes because Justin Simmons is one of my favorite guys. I've loved him for years. I've got him on leagues. I'm not dropping him. I'm holding him because I think he's going to go somewhere. I've said this, and this is part of my bias as being a Colts fan. I think he would be phenomenal for Indy. They just don't have a free safety that has any experience. That was what they were missing big time last year with Blackman moving to strong safety. I think that Simmons would be an absolute phenomenal fit there. But there are a couple other teams that could use them. Early on, I thought the Steelers were a good spot too, but then they signed Sean Elliott from Miami, so they kind of filled that void. But there's going to be some injuries. There's going to be something happen. Simmons is an old enough player that he's not worried about missing training camp. He can come in and play. He's ready to go. I'm interested to see where he goes, but I'm hoping sooner rather than later for fantasy purposes, I get him somewhere. Because I really he's a playmaker. Everybody knows it. He's a guy that ends up getting picks. He gets, passes deflected. He gets fumble recoveries. He just is always in the mix, even as a free safety. So he's a guy I'm gonna miss on Denver, but I'm hoping he lands in a good spot for fantasy purposes.
let me tell you who I like on Denver now, and that's PJ Locke. You saw him come on towards week 12 last year. He had 7 total tackles. All these tackles, skewing towards more solo than assisted. 7, 8, 7. He had a down week with 4, but then back to 9, 6. Fantasy Pro scoring in the past from week 12 on, he had 1, 2, 3, 4 double-digit fantasy points scoring games. Just exactly what you want. A couple, 3 pass deflections, 3 sacks. I mean, they were using him all over the field, whether it was to help with run support or to generate pressure. So I think he is, and the fact that I think they re-signed him also to this, to like a small deal this offseason, kind of tells you what they think about him. And there was talk about him having to compete a little bit for that starting gig. I think that's smoke. I think PJ Locke is the real deal. And for Dynasty, which you'll see my write-up on him for, our IDP, one of our IDP Dynasty targets at defensive back over at fantasyandframes.com. You'll read more about why I'm pretty high on him. And I think you all should be as well. In terms of anybody else here for the Denver Broncos, again, I want to make sure people understand, like, Patrick Surtain, really good
Stud.
NFL player,
Stud
right?
in real life, right?
Yeah, but you don't want him in IDP because you know why? The quarterback's not throwing to him.
Well, I was just gonna say, Jorge, not only is Patrick Surtain an absolute stud, Levi Wallace is terrible. Levi Wallace is terrible. If I saw him so much in Steelers games last year. I mean, every time someone got burnt, I looked up, I was like, I guarantee Levi Wallace was on him. And it was. He was awful. So if you're in a league that gives a like high percentage of pass deflections, points for pass deflections or tackles, especially if they give any kind of bonuses to cornerbacks, keep Levi Wallace on your radar. I would never want to really play him, but there's a chance that teams go after him and after him and after him and after him. I know I would be. If I was an offensive coordinator, I would look across and be like, we ain't going to Surtain's side. We're throwing at Levi Wallace every freaking play. So check that out. Keep an eye on him. My worry with him, in all honesty, I don't know if he keeps the job the whole year. I mean, he was really bad in Pittsburgh last year. So he's the guy I would keep an eye on, just because there's a chance they go after him so much that he ends up racking up a crazy amount of stats just because of that. And you saw he put up some stats in Pittsburgh last year just because teams were, and once Joey Porter Jr. kind of established himself, teams just started going at Levi Wallace left and right.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you. He's kind of like the DJ Reed of defensive backs here, like we were talking about last week with Steve Hungarter for the New York Jets. Like, you're not throwing at Sauce Gardner, you're throwing at the other guy on the other side who the quarterback's going to be targeting.
Brandon Jones is a weird one. I want to just say a couple things about him real fast.
Former Dolphin.
Good start with the Dolphins, and then he had basically not relevant, like could not see the field the last couple of years. Now he comes over, he's basically replacing Justin Simmons. He's going to be an interesting one. I've got him on a couple teams where I had him in salary cap leagues where I had a decent salary on him, so I didn't want to just drop him and eat the salary. So I'm hoping he kind of steps up and gets some play time here and puts up some stats, but it's going to be really interesting to see what he kind of does for a guy that has not seen much time over the last year and a half, 2 years.
Well, one of the things, I really liked about Brandon Jones in Miami is that both him and Javon Holland, during the Brian Flores era, they were like two safeties that were utilized in pass rush situations. I believe they both were like in the top 10 pressures or quarterback hits, or there was some like pass rushing metric that these guys were, performing very well at. So yeah, I'm curious to see what happens with Brandon Jones. But for me, it's all about the PJ Locke situation here in Denver. Jamie, you put the question here in the YouTube chat. What's the sleeper league you posted? It's for the Shoot the Gap Listener League. And feel free to join if you like. Everybody who's watching, whether you're on Facebook or on Twitter or on YouTube, just click on the link, and we would love to have you participate, whether you're an expert in IDP or you're just a fan. You know what? Look at Scott Fishbowl. We have so many analysts and we have so many fans, and you never know who's gonna win. And there will be a prize. So I talked to the good people over at Dynasty Decks. If you have not visited their website or Googled them, look them up, Dynasty Decks. We're going to give you, basically, it's like a plaque of the winning team's roster It's a really cool. Go to Dynasty Decks and Google them, see what they have to offer. Them, I'll get you one of those for the league winner as a gift there. So
I was just looking at your Steve on here talking about IDP Jones Eagles box safety. So he thinks he's going to be in the box a little bit, which is kind of nice. And he actually said in here, I'm excited about Brandon Jones, which gets me excited. I'm like, good. If you're excited about it, I'm hoping he has a bounce back year. I'm like, I'm loving this. So I think he's going to get an opportunity here in Denver. They don't have a lot of guys. Everybody backing these guys up a safety are fourth, fifth rounders. They're free agent signings. So it's not like they got like a first or second round pick just like waiting in the wings to take over. So I think these guys are going to get a decent amount of playing time. And even if they're bad, there's a good chance they're staying in the game. So I think Brandon Jones is someone, especially if you're in a deeper league, is maybe worth taking like a shot at, like way deep in your league, taking him late and kind of seeing how he performs there. Because there's a chance that this Broncos defense is going to be on the field a lot this season.
100%. All right, let's take our IDP evaluating talents to Kansas City. Nate Markham, our resident Kansas City Chief fan here at Fantasy and Frames, is now joining up with the guys on Fourth and Frames. And of course, before they went on air last hour, I asked him, so can I talk shit about your Kansas City Chiefs now that L'Jarius Sneed's no longer there? And to which Nate so eloquently put, sure, if you want to give the good people on Shoot the Gap misinformation, you go right ahead. So, kid jokes aside, like there's a lot of good pieces here, and there's some pieces that I'm kind of questioning. For redraft purposes, for dynasty, different story, but let's keep it to redraft here. Let's start up front. Let's not even get to the linebackers because I think we can kind of figure out who are the players to select. Chris Jones. Look, you've heard of Chris Jones, folks, and if you haven't, you're about to. This guy is one of the most elite defensive linemen in all of football. One of the things you really like about him is his versatility. When you look at his snaps last year, his defensive lineman alignments, he played, the B gap, so he was in the middle, but then he played outside. He played over tackle. He was the most shifted, defensive lineman along the defensive line for the Kansas City Chiefs. So he can act as an edge rusher. He can act as an interior lineman. The Kansas City Chiefs, Steve Spagnuolo, he puts him in places. He puts him in places like Dan Quinn put Micah Parsons in places in Dallas. Like wherever he gets the positional advantage, he's going to send, onward. Chris Jones, go destroy the other team's quarterback. When we look at fantasy finishes last year, he was near the top there. So just a lot of good things, especially in defensive tackle leagues where he's probably going to get clumped into. You definitely want that advantage there in taking him. He's somebody you're paying up for, folks. So there is a premium that comes with that. But he had 10.5 sacks on the season last year. Just a really good player. George Karlaftis. I have mixed feelings about George Karlaftis because in theory, you would think that he would get a lot of one-on-one situations here. As Chris Jones is playing on the outside, but just not enough of production. He did get 11 sacks last year. He did get the 64 total pressures, but for fantasy purposes, what did that truly translate into? Not a lot because the tackle numbers weren't really there. I don't know. I'm kind of a little bit out on George Karlaftis for a redraft for dynasty. I'm definitely gonna hold him, but I don't know. I'm a little bit torn. What are your thoughts on George Karlaftis?
Yeah, for me, if I'm got him on my team, it's probably a sack heavy league. I want a league that's gonna give you really good points for per sack. I don't know if you saw on Twitter they had a little fight at practice. He went
No.
and absolutely laid out Kadarius Toney on a screen
What?
pass, and Kadarius Toney got up and just chucked the ball at him. And there was like Huge, like, because they were all going shoulder pads and helmets. There was no pants, no full tackle. They ran a screen, and Carl Loftus came flying out and just laid him out. One of the guys came up before and kind of like, half ran by him and tapped him. And Carl just hammered him. I was like, oh. So there was a little scrum at the Chiefs camp because of that. I still like him. He's still young. But he's a guy who just hasn't given us the production that we want. In redraft for me, I'm waiting. If I get to where I'm like, okay, I need an extra defensive end as a backup, let me throw somebody like him in there. I'm probably more in on him on Dynasty just because I think there is room to grow there for him. But yeah, the tackle numbers are a little iffy. And then the other issue with him, right behind him, also in that mix, I'm gonna totally butcher his name. And Duke Azuma, the number one pick from 2023, is right there
Yeah.
with him.
Yep.
So you got both those guys, former number one picks, kind of battling out on the other side. So both those guys. If I'm in redraft, I'd rather hold and wait and see if either one of them kind of breaks out, and then I would try to grab them. Opposite, but Chris Jones obviously is the guy you want, just the way they move him around everywhere. So a solid line, for the Chiefs for sure.
Yeah, just and I think I'd be more confident in Karlaftis as somebody that would vouch for saying there is definitely some high DL3 DB2 upside. If there was ironically, if Chris Jones just didn't do as much as he did, like if he was just traditionally just like the outside edge rusher and Karlaftis was the other side, I think they would both feed off of each other and you'd have more one-on-one situations in terms of lining up with their offensive lineman counterparts. But because they have Chris Jones going everywhere, you're not getting that consistency, I think, from week to week from Karlaftis. Now, you look back at his fantasy points per game, he finished as the DL 38. So I mean, there's something there, but for some reason it's just not translating for fantasy purposes that I just can't get behind. But obviously, Chris Jones is somebody who I honestly, I think for people who play in leagues where there's like just a defensive lineman, a linebacker, a defensive back spot, people are probably going to be going for those, defensive linemen or those hybrid LB DL players to fill their defensive line spot. But again, if I'm going linebacker heavy, you and I, we've said many times here on Shoot the Gap, like there are very few defensive tackle people that we would consider putting in our defensive lineman spot. And I think Chris Jones is one of them if you're waiting to take a defensive lineman at the position. Or do you disagree with that?
No, I agree with you completely. Obviously defensive tackle, you want him big time, but in a defensive line only league, he's still worth it because, like you said, he brings the rushes. They move him around. He's not just a inside rusher. So, Chris Jones in it, you will get him later. I will say that you can definitely get him in a redraft league a little later, as if it's a defensive line combined league like you do on Sleeper.
Next, let's go down to the linebacking position, and I want to say this. I did not realize this until just looking at the numbers just now. The linebackers for the Kansas City Chiefs are very efficient when tackling.
Very good. They're two of my favorite guys. Nick Bolton, former
Yeah.
Missouri guy, is my all-time favorite. I love Bolton. I took him in every IDB rookie draft, and if leagues I had a partner, they're like, "Really, this guy?" I'm like, "He's an absolute stud. He's gonna make every tackle." I love this guy, and everyone were like, "Oh, that was a good move by you. He's been awesome." He is dropping in redraft quite a bit this year because of the injury last year. He missed a decent amount of time. He was going really high last year in leagues, top 3 or 4 linebackers in a lot of leagues. Now he's going a little closer. I don't know what you have in your numbers. I've seen him going a little more like linebacker 10, 11, kind of in that range. So I think he's a little bit of a steal just because of the injury. I'm interested in what you think with Drew Tranquil. The fact that they signed him behind one game, I was like, oh man, I don't know if I love that at all. Well, they let Game move on, sign Tranquil to a 3-year deal. They obviously think he's really good. This is a team that plays two linebackers pretty much all the time. I mean, they're pretty much playing that 2-5 in the secondary. So Tranquil's a guy that I really like. I've seen him fall in redraft leagues. Where are you looking at? Where are you taking? Because I think both those guys, Bolton and him, can put up really solid numbers in Kansas City this year.
Yeah. So going back to answer your question, let me go back to the efficiency metrics here. When you're looking at linebackers or anybody in general for tackling production, you want them to have a sub 10% missed tackle percentage. Drew Tranquil, Leo Chenal, and Nick Bolton all have sub 10. The only person who had above 10 was Willie Gay. What do you know? He's not there anymore. I don't know if that's the reason why, but the point is that the main core of linebackers who has remained with the Chiefs, very efficient tacklers. I like Drew Tranquil. I like, when Nick Bolton went out due to injury, he kind of like took over that, dominant linebacker role for fantasy production. I do like what he brings to the table. And I don't think if Nick Bolton is healthy that he takes away any opportunity because it's because of that efficiency or the lack of inefficiency. And that is they may not, how do I phrase this? Like they may not get a lot of opportunities for tackles, but when they do, they will get their tackles. You know what I mean? And they will get their solo tackles. And so I do definitely think that there is a pathway for fantasy relevance for Drew Tranquil to be, an LB3, LB2, like floating around there, having those good weeks. Now
Yeah, Steve put up a nice little stat here for us. He said he averaged 6 blitzes per game last year in 16 games after only 57% of the snaps because he was kind of sharing time with Gay. I think that goes way up. I think the same thing with Bolton. He's a guy that can get you multiple stats, interceptions, sacks, fumble recoveries, forced fumbles. I think both those guys have the ability to make big impact plays. And I think Tranquil now taking over full time with Gay being gone, I
Right.
like him so much more. I think he's a really, really nice value in redraft right now.
You look at his metrics for PFF, he was graded as the number one pass rushing linebacker for the Kansas City Chiefs, had 18 total pressures with 5 sacks, 2 quarterback hits, and 11 quarterback hurries. So, yeah, the more opportunity he gets, he only played in 50 pass rushing snaps. I think that goes up. Willie Gay, he led. He was tied with Leo Chenal with 66 pass rushing snaps last year. No Willie Gay. I think that's a vacancy in snaps that go Tranquil's way. So yeah, I'm totally on board with what Steve's saying here in the chat. But yeah, so going back to what you're saying, I'm all on board Nick Bolton, and if I can get him at a discount, which I don't know, it really depends on the league you're in, man. Like if you're in
you're right, it does.
In the league where there's a bunch of sharks in there who've been playing for years, they're not going to be scared away by the injury. They're gonna look at Nick Bolton and look what he's done in the 2 Super Bowls he's been in and be like, all right, we're good, right? But if you are in leagues where there are people who are having that concern and are a little bit injury averse to paying up for the tops at a position, oh my god, I'm taking Nick Bolton. Especially if he's the 10th linebacker off the board, I consider that game over. You might as well just hand me the title for.
Oh yeah, I'm taking it if he's sitting there. I'm kind of waiting to see where people take linebacker. If I'm not one of the first guys, I want one of the top 2 or 3. And I'm like, oh, let me see when they start coming off the board. Bolton's up there for me. As soon as I start seeing those top 3, 4 guys go, he's the very first guy moving the top of my queue. I'm getting him that round. I'm going to see kind of where he drops, but I'm not going to try to get the full discount. I love him too much, and I think he's going to be too good. This defense has improved a lot, and I think Bolton is really one of the main cogs along with Chris Jones. So I love Bolton. He, like I said, right now, he is probably along with TJ Watt, my 2 favorite defensive players in the league right now. I just think he does a little bit of everything, and the guy he's just a beast.
So Jamie, sir, interesting comment you're throwing in the chat here. But you know what? We do here IDP late at night. So I think after a certain hour, we can get away with what we talk about to a certain degree. And he's putting up here, I'm about to hit up the strip club. Y'all want to come with me? Well, we're kind of in the middle of a podcast right
If we
now.
were in the middle of a show, we consider it. You buying the first round of drinks. That's the key.
Yes. Or
Who's buying the first
is
round?
is there like a buffet? Do they have like chicken wings? Because I know people hear about buffets at strip clubs. And they're like, oh, that's just a myth. You know,
It's not.
it's not. It's
I had a cousin. I'm not gonna. This is probably a story I shouldn't tell, but I had a cousin who used to live in Denver, and he would go every Sunday to the strip club because they had NFL Sunday ticket and they had a full buffet. It was like $9.99. He's like, dude, people don't understand how great it is a place to watch a game. They had all these huge TVs. They had NFL Sunday ticket, $9.99, all you could eat. He's like, dude, I would just go in there and just hang out. He was like, it was so chill. It was like you were at a bar. It was really chill. He loved it. He thought it was the greatest thing. I thought that was so hilarious because I was like, really? Like going there Sunday, watching the game? He's like, oh, dude, it's the best time. So I think Jamie also actually had a fantasy football related question in there somewhere. There it is. Asking about defensive linemen, DeForest Buckner, Christian Wilkins, and Derek Brown at defensive tackle for DL positions too. In sleeper, those are definitely three guys I'm considering taking in a defensive tackle only league. Absolutely 100%. I'm taking any of those guys. On a DL league, I do. I think in FF7, I actually took DeForest Buckner as my D lineman. You got to start one D lineman in that league. If you look at his numbers of what he puts up and the stats for where you can get him compared to some of the edge rushers, I think it's worth it. So, and then Christian Wilkins, new team, but he usually puts up really nice tackle numbers. We'll talk about him in just a few minutes here. And then Derek Brown, I think, as well. So those are three guys I would consider, even if you're not playing defensive tackle only, they are D line. I do like them.
And just to calm Steve's fear about buffets and strip clubs, he says some things should not mix. They don't mix. Like the buffets are like at the far away from the stage.
Separate. We're separating these things. I'm pretty sure I'm in the restaurant business. I'm pretty sure that would be against health code. Yeah. Pretty positive. Almost in all 50 states, that would be against health code.
Can you imagine all the glitter in your food? Oh, it's gross. I don't want to think about it. Okay, let's get back to football.
Back to football. Back to IDP.
IDP. Defensive back position here. I'll tell you who I'm really looking forward to. And for Dynasty, I made it a point to draft him. For redraft, he could be somebody that could potentially make a play, make an impact for this team, depending on how Justin Reed, handles his strong safety position. And that's Jaden Hicks, the rookie here out of
Washington State.
Washington State, thank you.
Cougars. He was absolutely one of my favorites when we talked about pre-draft on this show. Rookie draft. I was like, man, Jaden Hicks, this guy I kind of got onto him late, saw some tape, kind of dove into him, and I was like, I really like this guy. At the end, I think I'd have to go back and look at my final rankings. I think he was my safety 2 or 3 coming into the draft. I really liked him. He was, I'm pretty sure he was my safety 2 behind Tyler Newman. He fell in the draft a bit, which I was a little shocked about how late he went in the draft. But man, word out of camp, he's already looking really good. There's talk about him already working with the ones on defense. He was just a playmaker for the Cougars. I loved when I saw that he got drafted by Kansas City. I was like, ooh, this could be a really, really nice fit for him. Redraft, he's a guy you can probably wait on and see kind of what hits. But man, in Dynasty, if you're in a Dynasty IDP league, if you haven't drafted yet, put Hicks on your list for your rookie draft. If you have already drafted, put him on your list of waiver wires if somebody did not take him. I think he's going to be a stud in the future.
Out of all the draft eligible players from college football this past year for 2024, out of 167 teams in the NCAA, he was number 1 in box snaps for safety. And what's the thing we talk about here? Box snaps, you want your box safeties. You want the
Box
base.
snaps, box snaps, box
Yes.
snaps. This is the
You
best. I love that stat. That's a great stat. Thank you for backing me up with that. I love that.
100% all about that. But as far as everybody else, though, Brian Cook, I believe he was drafted last year, or not the year before, like free safety. I haven't seen anything that makes me want to jump for joy. Justin Reed, I think, is one of the most inefficient safeties in the NFL. So I'm not really, again, it's really for this situation, for the defensive back situation. I'm thinking more dynasty than I am redraft. But
Yeah.
if things
McDuffie is real interesting
okay, go with them.
because they had a lot of success with their slot nickel, corner in the past for IDP purposes. Who's going to take that spot? McDuffie played it some, and he actually put up really good numbers when he did. If you look at their, the depth chart right now, they actually have him playing an outside corner spot. If he plays the outside corner spot, I'm out. If McDuffie somehow ends up moving back inside, he's a guy I want to keep an eye on. The guys they have listed right now in that spot are nobody I'm even considering taking unless all of a sudden they start blowing up. I'm not looking at any of those other guys.
Right. All right, let's, we're talking about strip clubs. We're talking about lots of food. Let's go to Las Vegas. And here it has.
That's right. Hey, great segment into Vegas, baby. Vegas.
Gotta love it. Bob Long, if you're watching, I know you've always said the Fantasy Football Expo would be held in Canton, Ohio for obvious reasons. And I'll always support you and support the Fantasy Football Expo. But man, if we could have it twice a year and have a secondary location in Las Vegas, I'm just telling you, I'm sure a lot of people would not hate that also.
Yeah, doing all the big drafts, the Kings Classic, all those things out there would be pretty awesome. I had a buddy went out
Right?
to Circa Sportsbook this year and did a draft there. He took pictures. I was like,
Yeah.
that's my dream. Just like I don't even know how huge it is, but just the whole side of a building that's a TV with a pool and everything. I'm like, man, I was like, this would be awesome.
It would be. You know who else is awesome in Vegas? Max Crosby. 94 pressures, 15 sacks, 15 quarterback hits. 56 tackles to 19 assisted tackles. These numbers courtesy of Pro Football Focus. One of the top rated overall defensive linemen in the NFL. When we look at Fantasy Pros' top defensive lineman, top defensive lineman last year. He was the DL2, averaging 14.1 points per game, using Fantasy Pro scoring. On 14 and a half sacks, you put him in a big play IDP league where you get rewarded for more points or sacks. I mean, this guy does it all. And here's the thing, whether he's facing single teams or double teams, it doesn't matter. We talk about a lot about edge rushers, benefiting from having one-on-one matchups to help them, basically get past their offensive blockers and get to the quarterback. It doesn't really matter for Max Crosby. You could have 3 people there, 4 or 5. You could have the entire defensive line. He will get past all of them and get to the quarterback. He is the gem of gems. I think he should be. I haven't done my IDP redraft rankings yet, but trust me, folks, they're coming. I see no reason. I would need to be talked out of him not being my defensive lineman one this year.
Yeah, for me, he's my defensive lineman too. And the only reason he's number 2 is TJ Watt for me is in front of him in a league where he counts as a defensive end. You're going to be in some leagues where he counts as a linebacker, but I think those guys are neck and neck. I mean, they're right next to each other as 1 and 2. Crosby's just got a motor that doesn't stop. The guy is just an animal. He fights through every play, like you said. Multiple double teams, triple teams. He doesn't care. He keeps going. So I've got Watt probably in redraft. Dynasty, I probably give a slight edge to Crosby just for the age difference. But man, those guys are right up there with me with a couple of the other main studs, the Parsons and the Garretts. So I think those guys you're paying up for them, but those guys are worth it. if you're in the right type of scoring IDP league, those guys are going to be putting up RB1 numbers. I mean, they're going to be putting up great numbers for you.
So breaking news, since we announced the formation of the listener league here at Shoot the Gap, we've had 7 people join the league. So thank you very much for those who are joining our listener league. Please, for those who are still watching, which is a lot of you actually, which is, first of all, thank you for staying up late and listening to us talk IDP Fantasy Football as I'm stumbling over my words here. Thank you. Feel free to join, whether you're a newbie or you're seasoned vet. We'd love to have you join and make some friendships and make some good memories playing in this very creatively structured scoring type of league. So anyhow, all right, we know Max Crosby is the guy, obviously. Let's talk about what's going on the other side of the defensive line. And I want to talk about Malcolm Kuntz here because, with Crosby, he had 94 total pressures, Malcolm Kuntz, he got 52, total pressures, 8 sacks, second in the team, 10 quarterback hits. You look at his production from a fantasy perspective down the stretch of the season, once you started finally seeing him get more snaps from week 15 through week 18, he was getting you 20.5 points, 30.3 points, 3 points, and then finishing off the season with 12 points scored in those games. He reminded me very much of a Carl Grant. The way he finished his season reminded me of Carl Granderson's season a couple of seasons ago for the Saints, where he's playing opposite of Cameron Jordan. And then last year we saw how Carl Granderson continued with the starting position for the Saints, which we'll get into that when we get to the NFC South preview. But it reminded me of the same situation. And the fact is that now I believe he is listed as the starting defensive end opposite Max Crosby. That is interesting. And we're a year away from them drafting Tyree Wilson being the opposite edge rusher, who in Dynasty, I was like, I'll draft him in rookie drafts because he's opposite Max Crosby and this is going to work out well. And Chandler Jones is on his way out, so but no, it's Malcolm Kuntz. He's the one who's seizing control of this job and is, I think, going to benefit. Should people be worried, though, JT, about Tyree Wilson and the fact that he was technically drafted to be their next edge rusher?
Usually I would be concerned in this situation, but Kuntz looked really good down the stretch last year. He looked really good. He's still young. Guy's 26. He's also not like he's an undrafted free agent. Guy was a 3rd rounder, out of Buffalo. So anytime you're, top 3 round pick, especially out of a small school like that, it says something for you. The interesting thing is what the Raiders are kind of doing. I think they like Kuntz so much. They're talking that they're moving Tyree Wilson inside, and he's going to be a rusher from the inside, which is, watching his college tape is not something you would have thought they would have done. But it's going to be interesting to see how he kind of progresses there, and if maybe they do some more combinations with those guys with the speed they both have. Maybe they do some more twists on the defensive line. Maybe they move some guys around. They're going to have. I tell you what, for a team that isn't expected to be very good, I really like this defensive line. I mean, they added Christian Wilkins from Miami, who has been one of the top tacklers as far as defensive tackles have gone the last couple of years, as well as getting pressure on the QB. If you were just looking at this defensive line, I'd be like, man, this team might be pretty good. But I don't know where they're going to be at. But I do like these guys. I do like this front. I like Wilkins still. Be interested to see how he fits here, but I think he'll be good. And I think Kuntz is worth it. He's a guy that I think a lot of people are going to be sleeping on. So I think you can get him, especially in redraft, and get him really late. Obviously, Dynasty, I'd still hold on to Tyree Wilson and kind of see what happens. See if he ends up being able to make that next step this year, and he counts as a defensive tackle. Ooh, now he's a guy, and people dropped him last year. He might be a steal for you this year, picking him up in those types of in dynasty leagues.
100%. All right, let's go to the linebacking position. Robert Spillane, came out of nowhere. Former Steeler comes to Vegas. Everybody's like, oh, he's a depth piece. Oh my God. Like his production last year was just very unexpected, but very welcomed for fantasy managers. Let me pull up his finish here. Finishes the linebacker 13 in fantasy points scoring, averaging 13.7 points per game using Fantasy Pros scoring metrics. 82 solo tackles to 66 assisted tackles. Had 3 interceptions, and I think one of the most awesome interceptions I saw was him versus the Chargers. Remember that game when the Raiders just lit up the Chargers? Well, it was like 50 points.
That game was wild. I had a bunch of friends we were watching, and we kept thinking like, are the Raiders going to blow them out, or should we like start taking the Chargers like money like against the spread now that they're going like? And it was like, oh no, it was just like that. Bam, Raiders just get put it on. You're like, what is happening here? But Spillane was such a good surprise. The funny thing was, he was kind of a special teams player for the Steelers. Moves on to the Raiders, and he's like, I think I should be able to be a starter. Moves on to the Raiders, and he's everything the Steelers missed last year. It's exactly who they needed. They were like looking around, like, man, we really need a solid inside linebacker who just knows the system. And I'm like, oh wait, he's playing in Las Vegas. So yeah, the Steelers missed him big time last year. I'm super happy for him. A guy that really had to earn his spot. I was the guy that really loved the fact that he hit hard in IDP last year. I don't think he's going away, man. This guy just works hard. He's a tough nosed player. I like him. I think he's a really nice play, especially in redraft.
I got so excited talking about Robert Swain, words I never thought I'd say out loud, that I completely missed talking about Christian Wilkins. And you'd even referenced him earlier in the show. Finishing last year, again, going back to Fantasy Pro scoring as the defensive lineman 20. And this is a defensive tackle finishing as a defensive lineman overall 20 with 9 sacks, 36 solo tackles to 27, averaging 8.9 a game. What more could you want for him going to a team with 2 very good edge rushers, one super elite edge rusher, and one in Malcolm Kuntz, who made some strides last year and is being given the opportunity this year. And now all of a sudden, okay, well now Christian Wilkins, has a pathway to tackles, a pathway to pressures. What are your thoughts here with Christian Wilkins here in terms of both as a defensive lineman overall as well as in defensive tackle leagues?
Yeah, defensive tackle. He was, most leagues he was top 10 last year. And they had a ton of injuries on that Miami defense, but he was still solid. I mean, this is a guy who 2 years ago, he had, I think it was 59 tackles, something crazy like solo tackles. He had 16 tackles for a loss, 9 sacks last year. To me, this was a super underrated signing for this team. The Raiders already had a pretty nice D line, and a guy like Wilkins just takes your line to another level. I think he's going to be really good here. It's going to be interesting to see where his tackle numbers end up. If he ends up having a fairly high tackle number, because are the Raiders going to get down, and is he going to be forced to make more tackles against the run? Or is it one of those things where he is going to be more used as a pass rusher, specifically because they're bringing so much pressure from the outside? Is that going to free him up on the inside? So either way, I think he's going to be pretty valuable. I'm always slightly worried when a guy moves to a new team because you're just never quite sure how they're going to use him, how he's going to fit in. But this feels like a really nice fit for Wilkins. And this D-line, again, I really like this D-line for them. So Wilkins is the guy I'm definitely targeting. Again, in one of those D-line only sleeper leagues where defense tackles and DNs go together, Wilkins is still a guy I'd definitely consider taking and playing, even though he technically is a defensive tackle.
So to piggyback up what you just said, Jamie just asked, is Wilkins as a D tackle still in the top 24 of defensive linemen overall for fantasy?
He's in that mix. He's in that mix. It's going to be tough to see. where do you have him? I would count him probably top 30, 32 right now. It really just
Yeah.
depends on kind of what happens with the Raiders, how he kind of fits in the system there. Um, he's a guy I like though. He's proven that he can get sacks. He's proven he can make tackles as a defensive lineman, which is always the hardest thing when you're playing defensive line, is getting anybody that has more than 18, 20, 22 tackles. If you can get somebody that's getting you 40 tackles, 50 tackles as a defensive lineman, that's huge.
Like you look back to his success last year, and a lot of that I think is predicated off of look at the edge rushers he had to work with. He had Bradley Chubb on one side, he had Jalen Phillips.
Mm-hmm.
When Jalen Phillips was out, he had Andrew Van Ginkel come in. He had opportunities free up for him in the middle. And again, I'm hoping that that's what you're seeing in Vegas. But there's the uncertainty with Malcolm Kuntz. Like, is this a definitive thing, or was this just a hot streak last year? So it's for that reason, new team, new situation, that I would probably have him outside my top 24 defensive lineman overall. Had he stayed in Miami, he would have. I think I would have made that. You could have made the case for him staying in the top 24, but not this year. I don't think for me.
Yeah, just always a little bit of risk when a guy moves to a new team and just not quite sure how he's going to fit in with their system. But he's got the talent. He's got the talent.
Let's talk about Divine Diablo. Man, health, right?
And he seems like he was like, was it 2 years ago? He felt like the darling. Everybody's like, oh, yeah. Diablo's gonna be the guy. Plus, he's got a freaking awesome name. Whenever you got a cool name like that, Divine Diablo. I mean, it's just a sweet sounding name. And then Spillane came in and took all the thunder. He was the guy to have. And so I'm not. I have to be honest. I don't think I own a single share of him because I'm not 100% sold. He's had some nice years in the past, but like you said, injuries. We've never got to see the full meal deal from him, and so that worries me.
I think what made him such an attractive pickup for people for fantasy is that he had that DBLB eligibility in a lot of leagues.
That was sweet when you could play him at either one. The only time I think I ever had him was when I had him in a sleeper league and he could play either one. And I was like, oh, this is gonna be great because I can play him as my DB.
Right. But if he is now being only available as a linebacker, I think you can do better than Divine Diablo. I wouldn't. He's not somebody I would like go 0 LB for and like wait. Like, oh, I'm just going to wait for Divine Diablo in my later rounds and go defensive back and defensive lineman, which never do that, by the way. Heavy in my leagues. So for me, it's the Robert Spillane show at linebacker.
Yeah, for me, the only guy, Tommy Eichenberg, is a guy to keep an eye on. I wouldn't be shocked the rookie out of Ohio State if he ends up stealing that job. I think he could. I think by the end of the season he could end up stealing Diablo's job. Obviously, don't take him in a redraft. Keep an eye on him though. Like I said, hit that watch list button and keep an eye on him. He's a guy. If you're in a big league where you can afford to stash some guys in Dynasty, Eichenberg is a guy that I've got on my watch list. I don't have him on a lot of teams right now, but he's a guy that's sitting there in case I'm looking to make a waiver wire move or pick a guy up. He's a guy that I'm keeping an eye out for.
Yeah, that totally co-sign on that. Here's somebody that I co-signed moving to defensive back for a good chunk of the season, early in the season last year, because I saw his production just reach heights that he had not had in previous seasons. And that is Trayvon Moehrig, who traditionally was drafted as a free safety and then last year moved to strong safety. You saw the box snaps be present there. And you look at week 4 through week 11, and I'll just go off of, again, fantasy points per game, Fantasy Pros points per game, 17, 10, 11, 9, 12, 14, 4.5, and then finishing up with 12. Like, the guy was pretty decent. The tackle numbers are there. He got you double-digit fantasy points for a good chunk of that stretch. And then you go, after the bye week, from week 12 on, 5.3. Then they had their bye. Then it was 8.3, 0.8, 6.8, 5.3, 9.5. It's like, what the just happened to Divine Diablo's fantasy value? Excuse me, not Divine Diablo's, Trayvon Morrick's fantasy value. I don't know. I don't know, and that scares me a little bit here because I really thought there was sleeper potential with him finally, given that strong safety role, given the majority of box snaps there, and it just faded so quickly. And I don't know whether he was dealing with like an injury or something, but like something didn't click, or I don't know what to make of that. Do you?
Yeah, he's a guy that I can't figure out. I don't have much of him just because, again, like you said, I just can't tell if he's going to be the real deal or not. And there's just in his range, there's too many other guys I'd rather have, so I tend to end up passing on him. Um, I think he could end up being something, but like I would if he dropped to me and I was like, oh wait, he's still there after deep into a draft, maybe, but he's not a guy I'm actively targeting just because I'm just not sure about him, to be honest with you.
Okay, well then let me ask you about the cornerback position because Nate Hobbs definitely surprised a lot of people last year.
Yep.
Led the team amongst all cornerbacks in box snaps with 140, 504 slot cornerback snaps. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, if I'm in a league, you have to start a cornerback. He's one of the top 5 guys for me. I want him. I think he's going to stay in that role. I think he's really good in that role. He's a physical guy. Um, he's definitely at the top of my list for that. Now, again, we've talked about this a little bit in the past. Usually you want those box safeties, but man, if you got a nickel corner who's basically playing in the box all the time,
Right.
you can take that guy. So he's a definitely guy that even if you're just playing DB only, I think he's worth taking. He's definitely going to be farther down on my list in a DB only league. But if you're in a cornerback league, I've got him clocked in most leagues in my top 5, 6, 7. He's a guy I'm definitely targeting just because I don't think that production is going down. I really don't. I think he's going to have a ton of guys, especially in that AFC, so many good slot receivers, so many guys that are going to be putting the pressure on with all the good quarterbacks in the AFC. I just think he's a guy, even though he's good, he's not your shutdown corner. So he is going to be targeted a lot. And the fact that he plays close to line, he is going to be in that mix for making tackles against the run. So he's a guy, honestly, for me. If I'm looking at a Raiders guy in the secondary, he's the guy I want.
In points per game, he was in the top 20, averaging 11.3 last year. When looking at that's amongst all defensive backs, not just cornerbacks. When looking at tackle numbers, let me pull it up here. He was near the. Sorry, let me pull it up again. 59 total tackles to 27 assisted tackles. Like you said, like a cornerback, he had 9 pass deflections. So he was being targeted, like you were saying, not that shutdown cornerback, but somebody that teams will go after in the slot. Yeah, I like this. This ironically, this is a cornerback that I would be willing to wait on and get at value in drafts versus somebody who's like a box safety like Trayvon Moore. You know what I mean?
Exactly. You could wait on him and get really nice value. In a couple of my leagues, slightly different scoring than the PFF that you guys went off of, but he missed 4 games because of injury last year. But in a couple of my leagues, he was the number 2 average points per game for any cornerback. So he finished slightly behind Devin Weatherspoon and just ahead of Kenny Moore and Deron Bland. And Deron Bland had a lot of picks last year. So that tells you something, about how high Nate Hobbs was at that list. As you said, the overall DB scoring. But if you look at just cornerback scoring and points per game, and like I said, if you have those leagues that give you slightly advantages for having points per game for cornerbacks, so they get a little bump in tackles or deflections, I mean, I had a league where he averaged 16 and a half points a game, which if you're getting that out of cornerback, you're pumped if you're getting that kind of production out of someone like that.
Oh, 100%. All right, let's go to our final team in our AFC West preview. We are definitely going a little bit longer than we normally do.
We got chatting up. You got me fired up about a few things, Jorge. It is 100% my fault. I will take the blame for running late tonight.
No, I should have known your fanaticism behind college fantasy, besides college football.
Then I was going to add an extra 10-minute, 15-minute segment to the
Yeah, no, hey, you know what? The people loved it, and that's all that matters. So we have close to 200 watching right now, and now almost an hour and a half in. So again, thank you all for tuning in with us. All right, let's go to California, SoFi Stadium, Los Angeles Chargers, Jim Harbaugh there. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. You know, Joey Bosa, another year, missed a bunch of games. Khalil Mack. Like I say his name and I'm just like, Khalil Mack was freaking.
He was the best ball darling of IDP last year. If you had Khalil Mack on your IDP best ball team, you were probably doing pretty well. He was an absolute champ. And if you weren't in best ball, I feel bad for you. Hopefully you got on board in time and started playing him when you needed to, because man, he put up some crazy stats last year. Reminded you of the old days of Khalil Mack when he was on the Raiders, the good times.
Not the Bears, where he was basically
a little disappointing. I hate to bring him up. My girlfriend actually has 2 Khalil Mack Bears jerseys. They're still nice. They're cute jerseys. They're good on her, but it was not the era the Bears fans were hoping for there.
Not so much. Jamie says, let's run this another hour. I love you, Jamie. You're awesome.
Thanks for sticking with us, bro. We appreciate it, man.
Speaking of sticking with us, Steve, man, it's like you're here with us, man.
I was gonna say, it's like we got to get you on the list and get you back on here immediately, because you're just throwing out all the knowledge for us. I love it.
It's fantastic. But you know, Joey Bosa, let me ask you a question for Dynasty. You trying to move him? Because I have him in one of my Dynasty leagues, and I'm like, I'm ready.
I've actually acquired him in quite a few situations because I've got him cheap. I've got him cheap. It's hard to move him if you've had him for a while, because you spent that high capital on him. It's just so hard to get off those guys. I got lucky. I actually had a league last year where some guys were desperate for a 2 QB league, needed a backup QB, needed a running back on my roster, and I was able to get Mack and Bosa in a pretty nice little deal for a backup running back and a backup QB. And they were nice when they could play, but man, Bosa, it's just like, for fantasy managers, you're starting to get that little, that little itch and that tick, and you're like, oh, Bosa, it's like you want him because you're like, oh, you hear the name and you're like, he should be awesome, but then you're like, am I gonna get burned again by him? Redraft.
Is he a value?
He's a value. He's a guy I would take a shot on late if nobody takes him.
As your first defensive lineman or your second one for depth?
I would go depth piece. He's a depth piece for me. I would be very nervous if I'm counting on him playing almost every game or being my starter most weeks. I love the bonus if he can be a backup for me. Real nervous if I'm counting him all the time. Khalil, you just talked about it. Man, some of the sack numbers he had a couple just monster games where they were like, I mean, he was winning the week by far. I was trying to see what those games were. I was trying to look him up real quick because he had a couple huge ones. I had a couple leagues where he literally finished anywhere from number 1 to number 4, depending on scoring in my league for all defensive ends. Absolute beast. I had one week. It was week 4. Can't remember who they played. I'm gonna look at. I had one league. He had 72 points that week. Yeah, 72 points. It was just. I mean, he had some monster games last year. Like I said, he was the best ball darling of all time last year. He had a couple more 30 and 40 point games. If you got him, you're hoping, man, can he just do like 85% of that again this year, and you'd be pumped.
Yeah, it was the debut of Aiden O'Connell week 4 versus his former team, the Raiders.
That's right. That was the one where he was just all over the place.
So 8 solo tackles, 2 assisted tackles, fantasy pro scoring, which I consider to be pretty balanced, not big play, not tackle heavy, but balanced. So what does that mean? That means a conservative point
Mhm.
total, like 59.5 points.
Yeah, like I said, I have a little bit more of a little bonus for sacks. He ended up with 72 in one of my leagues. It was unreal, just a monster game. And we're not even talking about the young guy. The young guy, dynasty wise, the guy I
Oh,
probably like the best. Do you want to try his name or do I want to jack it up? What do you
oh
think?
my God. Yeah, I know. I've been looking at it and I'm just like, and I look at it, it's been a
I
year.
always just call him Tui. I call him Tui instead of Tua. I call him Tui.
So it's
Tui
Tui, Tui,
Palutu.
Pulu, Pululo 2. Hmm.
I
Yep.
like to call him Tuli just
Yeah, let's
because
just put Tuli.
I just
Yeah.
butcher the last name all the time.
Yep. Yeah. And the thing is, I butcher it, and Nate Markin comes in here, and he'll just like, I'm just like, screw you, Nate. 51 total pressures, second on the team, 8 sacks, 7 quarterback hits. If Bosa goes, or if he misses time, he's somebody for Dynasty. I would pick up. I don't know about redraft. I would need to. He would definitely. No, I think I'm more interested in him for Dynasty for the long haul than I am for redraft this year. But definitely positive marks for him uh, going forward. Would you say?
I'm dynasty all the way with you on him. I've got him on a ton of rosters, and for redraft, again, he's one of the first guys in my queue. If Mac or Bosa goes down, immediately pick up. Immediately picking him up if one of those guys down. As you saw, our guy IDP Hunter jumping on here, fourth best run defender, entire NFL edge rushers last year. Was one of the best rookie edges per PFF. I mean, a lot of talent, a super good. It was just a super talented dude at USC. I mean, the biggest knock on him was just how much playing time he's going to get behind Bosa and Mac. I think he's the future there. I think, can Mac do it one more year? Does he got another year left in him like that? If Bosa has another injury plagued season, do the Chargers move on? I mean, they're a team that we've seen cap hell. They're paying all these guys a ton of money. Do they need to move on from some guys and get some of these younger guys in there? So redraft, I'm probably not drafting him in redraft. I have an eye on him, but dynasty, out of all three of those guys, no questions asked. He's the guy I want in dynasty.
Let's go to the linebacker, inside linebacker position. So guess what? This is probably one of the rare occasions where a team took their entire linebacking core and was like, "Bye, we're going to bring new people in
Yeah.
here." Yeah, so they brought in. Well, I guess besides Nick Niemann, but we're not going to. He hasn't earned the right to be talked about. We have Dan Henley from Washington State, rookie last year. But in terms of starters, like they got rid of Kenneth Murray, who's now a Titan. Who else did they get rid of? They got rid of Eric Kendricks. Now you bring in Denzel Perryman from Houston, and as productive as he was for IDP purposes and has been over the course of his career, your guy Junior Colson, and you were talking him up pre NFL draft here on Shoot the Gap a lot, man. This guy's in a spot, right? Like even for dynasty, yes, you targeted him as one of the top linebackers, but is he somebody that you could project? And I know it's hard to project, right? Somebody that you're taking off your waiver wire, like maybe 1 or 2 weeks into the season based off of performance, or is that kind of a little bit too ambitious for you?
Uh, I would be shocked if he lasts the waiver wire in redraft leagues. I think teams are going to get on
Really?
him. I really do. I've taken him in quite a few of the IDP redraft leagues I'm in, especially a lot of the charity leagues. FF7s, I jumped in on him. I think he has a chance to have a big year. Right now, he's going to get scared away. He's dropping a little bit right now because it just came out that he's on the injured list.
Mm.
So they haven't said it's anything super serious or anything like that, but he is on there right now. So I think that's pushing him down slightly. I just think Junior Colson, I've said it the entire offseason. He was my IDP one for rookies. I loved him. The fact that he went to the Chargers just solidified it with me going. where Harbaugh, his head coach, was. He knows the system. Harbaugh loves him. He was the number one, you know, maybe some other guys are slightly more talented, but he was the guy on the number one defense for the national champion. So for me, if there's anybody that got into a better position as a rookie, I don't think so. I think he literally stepped into the most perfect position for him to be successful. And the fact that they moved on for a lot of their veterans says to me they're going to give him the chance and play. And he has some learning, a little bit of a learning curve. He struggles a little early. There's no one on that roster that says they're going to steal that job from him for me, as long as he's healthy. I think he plays. I think he plays a lot. And I think he ends up wearing the green dot. I think he ends up being the man. And I think he ends up being the man for the next decade for the Chargers, hopefully, if I'm correct in my evaluation, which I hope I am. I love Golson. He was my number one guy I was taking off the board everywhere. I was overdrafting him partly because I hyped him so much that everyone was trying to steal him from me in drafts. So I had to go a little above and beyond to make sure I got him in a few places. But he's definitely a guy in a redraft. I think you could snake late in your draft. I think you can get real late. And if he hits, you're going to be really pumped that you had him. Because I think there's a really, 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 really good chance he leads this team in tackles this year.
Steve in the chat saying, "Amen." Yep, there we go. All right, let's finish up the last position for the last team here on our AFC West IDP preview, and that is the defensive back position. I don't know if you heard of this guy. His name is Derwin James. I hear he's pretty good at football and has power bombed Travis Kelce into oblivion once on Thursday Night Football, and is just
I totally forgot about that. That is awesome. I forgot that happened. That is great.
Yep. He went Captain Insano on him, pulling a Bobby Boucher reference here from the Water Boy on Travis Kelce a few years ago. Don't feel bad for Travis Kelce. He's probably going to be marrying a billionaire later on this year. Anyhow, that notwithstanding,
some guys get all the luck.
I know. No, I do not have insider information. I'm just stating what's pretty obvious. So we know what we're going after him. The question is, are we paying up for him in shallow leagues? I probably will. In deeper leagues, I'll probably wait. But you know what you're getting out of Derwin James, right? I mean, there's not really much we can say more about him, right?
Yeah, I mean, especially if you're in leagues that give you really high bonuses for like picks, fumbles, forced fumble recoveries, he's a guy that, he can win you weeks because he can do a little bit of everything. Obviously, defensive backs, there is going to be a little bit of that, give and take. Some weeks are just not going to put up great stats, but they're going to win you weeks. Other weeks, you got to assume in a redraft he's going to be top 3.
Yeah.
I mean, most people are going to take him top 3. If he dropped to 5, I would be like, I'd take him right away. I'd be like, oh, he dropped to 5th. I'd be all over him. So he's really the guy. Outside of him, I don't really love anybody in this defense. Sante Samuel is the shutdown corner. I think teams are going to avoid him. I think they're going to go away from him and go after the young guys or the inexperienced guys because they've got, some guys are not very highly drafted players. They've got some guys they've signed. That's the weak part of this defense outside of James, I think, is in the secondary. So he's a guy I definitely want. It just depends on, how your league looks at defensive backs and where you're taking them. You're going to have leagues where guys jump on DB early because they want the top guy, they think. And you're going to have leagues like we always talk about. Me and you probably take DB slightly earlier than a lot of other people because I think DB matters. And a lot of people really don't. Print the shirt. DB matters. So a lot of people, they would rather take DN and linebacker and then say, hey, I think I can get okay production for my DBs. I'm just not going to worry about it. So for me, it just depends on how early you have to go up and get him. He's a guy I want on my team, especially in redraft. But I'm going to play the field and see kind of what's happening before I go crazy and jump the top 3 linebackers and the top 5 DNs and take Derwin James. So I definitely want him, but I'm not going to break the bank and take him over some of those super high scoring linebacker DN positions.
So then, hearing your stance on that, as far as the defensive back situation here for the Los Angeles Chargers, what if I told you? What if I told you last year, amongst all defensive backs for the Chargers, safeties and cornerbacks, that he was the fourth best rated defensive back on his own team per PFF?
You're
One,
saying James is?
James is rated as the fourth best defensive back for. Okay,
I would not
knowing,
have seen that coming. I would not have seen
right,
that coming.
right, exactly. Who would you, if you had to guess, out of all the defensive backs, and I think you have Arla, it's pulled open, who do you think was rated the worst best defender as far as a defensive back for the Chargers last year?
Who was
Random
their top defender?
rate per PFF. Yeah.
Man, their
But
secondary was pretty terrible last year.
let me also throw you a couple hints here. Last season,
Was he still on the team?
He had 49 solo tackles. He had two interceptions, 10 pass deflections, and per Fantasy Pro scoring averaged you 10.1 points per game. Was the second highest box, had the second highest box stat totals, right behind Derwin James. Who do you think this person is?
Oh, I have to tell you, we did not talk about this before, and you've got me absolutely stumped. I'm trying to think. I'm like, I know the other guy that played was Gilman. Was Gilman? Did he put up that good of stats last year?
Yes.
Wow, dude, I would have never guessed that. Honestly, I would have never. That one you got. I was like, I think JT's Woods is better, but I was like, I don't remember him playing a ton last year, and I was like, oh my god, I literally, if I wouldn't have had the roster in front of me, you could have gave me 100 guesses, and I would have totally missed it. I'm just telling you, I'm being honest. I would have totally missed it if I wouldn't look at the roster. I was like, would it have been Gilman? That one shocks me. Honestly, that shocks me.
I didn't realize the PFF grade until just a few minutes ago, but like I'd always kept tabs on him, and Steve said it perfectly. He was a good waiver wire ad last year. Very sneaky defensive back waiver wire.
Oh yeah, I guarantee people missed on him left and right unless they were really deep diving, because I would not have thought about that at all. And I was like, I started going through my list, and I was looking at it, I was like scoring, and I'm like, oh, he was a whole lot higher than I would have ever guessed last year. That's really surprising.
Yeah, so
he had some really solid games. He had some really solid games last year,
and he's young. So I may have to write about him. I may have to do some deep dives. To answer your question, Jamie, why are people sleeping on Josh Metellus? I'm not. He's in my top 10, so that's what you need to know about that. But we'll talk about that.
Sneaky too, in that we were talking about it earlier with Diablo. There's a couple formats that have him linebacker DB. I don't know if it'll get changed, but if you can get that, that's kind of a nice little spot for him as well.
Exactly. So Aloy Gilman for redraft. I don't think he's a big enough name to be worried about him not.
Dude, I would almost make a bet with you, Jorge, unless you're playing with like a lot of experts. I can't even imagine him going off the board in a redraft league, like in the draft, during the draft. I can see some people like, oh, we'll watch him on the waiver, but I can't. Honestly, if I was in a league and I saw someone take him, I would have been like, get on the computer, like, what am I missing? Why? I would not even have thought about taking him. Honestly, that is a total. I whiffed on him last year. I didn't even think about him. That's wild.
Three comments before we get out of here, before we do our final takes here. Steve in the chat saying James has always been lower in coverage grades, but makes up with it tackles and power bombs. You forgot power bombs on the field. And
And,
Jamie,
and like we said, if you're in leagues where you get a lot of bonus points for takeaways, things like that, that's where he really makes up ground, where he can make some big plays for you. He's had some huge years on takeaways, but again, takeaways are tough. They're like touchdowns. They're not year to year. It's not like you can just be like, oh, well, he had 5 picks last year. He's going to get 5 this year. He's going to get 3. You just don't know that way with DBs how they're going to use them.
and then for the last comment we'll talk about in the chat today, probably the most disrespectful comment we've had this entire almost 2 hours of the show. Jamie with Taylor Swift is going to break up with Kelsey once he retires. That's how the Illuminati works. Bite your tongue.
And he said Taylor Swift too. He didn't even spell Swift right. That's all right.
That's is it all right, JT?
Maybe he did it on purpose. I don't know. I just,
wow, we're talking about the Illuminati. We're talking about strip club.
we went a little off the rails on this episode.
We
Jorge.
did.
I'm not gonna lie. We like, if you like a show that hits up a ton of million different things, we hit up a lot of different stuff on this episode. Plus, we talked a little bit about the AFC East IDP, a little bit about the AFC IDP.
Yeah. No. So we yeah, man. There's a reason why they put us on last on Fantasy and Frames Wednesdays.
We got to be the late night show. You just never know what's going to happen. You know, it's just like when Conan was the late night and he was just wild and crazy. You never knew what was going to happen. That's the Shoot to Gap show here on Fantasy and Frames. You never know.
And we thank all of you all who have tuned in tonight. Close to 200 people staying up with us late on a Wednesday, talking IDP Fantasy Football. It's such a small niche in the fantasy football world, but the fact is, you all are passionate about it, and we are passionate about it too, and we will continue talking about it. We're never going to not talk about it here at Fantasy and Frames. So we're very happy that you're all here. Thank you very much who are watching on YouTube and on Facebook and on Twitter. For those who are jumping in the chat today, just really motivated us to keep going, and just we really appreciate your patronage. Those who have signed up for our listener league during the show, first of all, thank you. You're going to have a great time, I promise. Told you during the show that we're going to get you a Dynasty Deck placard, the winner of the league this year. Whether you're an experienced IDP player, you're a content creator, you're a fan of IDP, or you're giving it a shot for the first time, trust us, you'll enjoy this league. It's very different from what you might encounter elsewhere, which is the whole point. It's unique. It makes it different. It makes it more engaging. You're going to walk away having fun and making some friends in the community, which is something that we could all use more of. And you can never have too many good friends to talk about fantasy football with, right, JT?
Absolutely. It's the best part of this whole thing. Making friends, talking with it, chopping it up. It's been a great show, man. I had a great time. The old football, like I said, broke in the 5th graders, showed them the defense, the 4-4-3 today. None of them had ever played a defense other than flag football. We just stay with the guy, run with that guy. So it was fun. I'm all juiced up on the defense today.
I know, man. It's a great day to talk defense. And the beautiful thing is, every team in the NFL has had a practice at training camp, and we are officially close to the Hall of Fame game, and then the week after that, we're at or at least I'll be at the Fantasy Football Expo hosting the IDP panel with Gary Davenport. So looking forward to seeing.
Still trying to see if I can figure out a way to get there. Like I said, it's my team. It's our first game of the year. That morning, out of town, about an hour and a half. So I'm like trying to figure out if I can make it work. I'm working on logistics. If I can get there sometime on Saturday, be there Saturday and Sunday, I'm going to make it work. Still up the air. Still trying to see if I can make that happen. I didn't know about this change till like 3 weeks ago. Did I figure out that practice started this week? So I was totally caught off guard when I had made plans for the expo.
If I can find a way to get you down here somehow, some way, whether driving up myself or having or figuring out a way to, if I can figure out a way,
I'm gonna work on it. I gotta work out these details. I gotta figure something out. I'm gonna throw a plan together.
There you go. There you go. So tune in next week, folks. We're going to be talking about um, the NFC West IDPs. I'm not even going to dignify that comment in the response there, Jamie. But it was funny. We're going to be talking about the NFC West IDPs. We're going to have a special guest, Mace from RPO Football, join us. He is one of the friends of the Fantasy and Frames family. He'll be competing in the Kings Classic IDP league this year, the Butkus League. So we're happy to have him join us here. And he's a friend of the Fantasy and Frames family, like I said, and we'll be talking NFC West. You know, he's a 49ers fan, so he'll love talking some 49ers. We'll have to pick his brain about that. But man, JT, this is a great time. Thank you very much, everybody who's been tuning in. So for JT, I am Jorge. We will see you next week.